Hello from the Channel studio in London and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches. I'm Teniola Oyetayo. On the programme this week, we focus on the situation in Sudan as countries around the world race against time to evacuate their citizens, as thousands of Sudanese also flee, crossing borders into neighbouring countries. Over 2 weeks into the conflict in Sudan, countries across the world have raced to evacuate their nationals. It follows a fourth ceasefire attempt and a brief pause in fighting between the army and a paramilitary force. The ongoing violence has paralyzed the main international airport, destroying civilian planes and damaging at least one runway. Other airports also have been knocked out of operation. For over 100 people touching down in Germany from Sudan on Monday, a frightening ordeal is now over. This flight is just one in a scramble by countries across the world to get thousands of citizens out of the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. An apparent lull in fighting between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces created a window for evacuations. Despite sustained pressure from the international community, the two sides have in the past failed to abide by a temporary truce. But the situation was calm enough over the weekend for the United States to extract embassy staff. That triggered a rush of evacuations by other countries. France and Germany said they'd got 700 people out. Following the announcement of a 72-hour ceasefire, Britain began evacuations of its citizens on Tuesday amid criticisms of the government's response to the situation.
Thank you. Over the last few days, we have been doing extensive planning across government departments and with our international partners to take advantage of any improvement in the situation and begin the evacuation of British nationals in Sudan. I'm very pleased that a ceasefire has been announced by the leadership of the factions on the ground, and therefore we are initiating an evacuation plan. It is important to remember that ceasefires have been announced and have fallen apart in the past, so the situation remains dangerous, volatile and unpredictable.
African countries, including Nigeria, Uganda and South Africa, also announced plans to start evacuating citizens. Kenya evacuated 39 Kenyan, Somali and Saudi students from war-torn Sudan on Monday evening.
Students from the International University of Africa, based in Khartoum, the Sudan. 39 in total, as I said earlier, 19 Kenyans, and 20 from our allied states and friends.
Most of the time we were sleeping, as in lying down on the floor, just praying and keeping positive. And I strongly had the feeling that I had to keep positive, very focused, and above all, to take any risk to get me out of that country.
A number of other countries who have also evacuated citizens include Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Greece, China, Italy, Spain and Lebanon.
Most of us were locked in our apartments for at least a few days. Some of us didn't have a chance actually to go back to collect our things. So some of us are wearing clothes that they had on their backs when the shooting and everything started. Yeah, it was pretty bad.
It's difficult to say how stomach churning it was. You know, you lose appetite, you're just constantly in stress, you don't know what's going to happen. Am I going to make it? Am I going to... It was glad by the time we got to the airport and we saw the British forces, the British planes, it was very, very tension relieving.
More than 10 days without electricity, without water, and the other 5 days were nearly without food. And outside the situation, especially in our area, it was horrible. The center was occupied by the opposition, that's the rapid forces, and shooting, bombing, everything. All 24 hours nearly.
Hailing the success of evacuations, the EU foreign policy chief said work also needs to continue towards a political end to the violence.
It has been a complex operation and it has been a successful operation. First, the staff of the European Union, 21 people are already in Europe, and many more European Union citizens and others are already out of Sudan. I cannot give you the concrete figure, more than 1,000 people for sure. I want to thank France especially for taking our people out, and I want to thank the combined efforts of many countries that took their nationals, but also all nationals that they could pick. So it has been a successful operation, but complex. I was in touch with the two generals fighting in Sudan, and now the ceasefire is stopped, it's over. We have to continue pushing for a political settlement. We cannot afford that Sudan, which is a very populated country, implodes, because it will be sending shockwaves around the whole Africa.
Sudan has now been plunged into a humanitarian crisis. Most hospitals are closed, and water and electricity supplies for millions of people are curtailed. The international community has repeated calls for an end to the violence.
The fighting must stop immediately. We need an all-out effort for peace. I call on the parties to the conflict, on Generals Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, Hemeti, and the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces to silence the guns. It is incumbent on Sudanese leaders to put the interests of their people front and center. This conflict will not and must not be resolved on the battlefield with the bodies of Sudan's people.
I reiterate the call of the UN Secretary General's call for the belligerents to de-escalate, to fully respect and uphold the ceasefire in order to facilitate efforts being deployed. And we must not lose sight of those who are most affected by this spiraling conflict, the people of Sudan. We must remain engaged. The AU will fully continue monitoring closely the situation and keeping this August Council duly informed.
The United States stands in solidarity with the people of Sudan. We stand in solidarity with the humanitarian workers who continue to try to provide assistance. As we have repeatedly said to the Sudanese security forces, it's time to put down your guns and to start talking.
Two generals continue trading accusations and issuing competing claims of control over key installations. There is yet no unequivocal sign that either is ready to seriously negotiate, suggesting that both think that securing a military victory over the other is possible. This is a miscalculation. As fighting continues, law and order will further break down throughout the country, and command and control will dissipate. Sudan could become increasingly fragmented, which would have a devastating impact on the region. And even if one side wins, Sudan will lose.
Fighter jets have bombed the capital, and the main airport has become a center of the fighting, while artillery bombardments have made movement unsafe in and out of one of Africa's largest cities. While the international community airlifted their diplomats and citizens from the country, many Sudanese desperately sought to flee the chaos, risking dangerous roads to reach safety. Following the country's rapid descent into violence, thousands have fled across borders into neighboring Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, and South Sudan.
Fleeing war-torn Sudan for 24-year-old Rawan al-Walid was a tale of fear and exhaustion. Now in Egypt, she says even celebratory fireworks marking the end of Ramadan make her anxious.
This was the longest trip of my life. We were on the road for more than 72 hours, full of fear amid the hard decision to leave behind my home, my country, Sudan, and many other things. It was a difficult decision to just leave like that. But another part is the trauma we're living with. Any sound of fireworks scares us.
For Rawan, the fireworks stir echoes of fighting in Khartoum, the capital, which since mid-April was engulfed in gunfire and artillery, as Sudan's army clashed with the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Rockets smashed into her family home, levelling a bathroom. After that, her mother decided to leave Sudan for another country, whatever the cost. The Walid family paid nearly $7,000 to charter a bus for about 50 family members. They travelled 600 miles to Egypt, driving through paramilitary-held lines, but not everyone in the family could make the trip.
I left behind my brother because of visa issues. My family, some of my aunts and my friends. The decision to leave. Yes, I survived, but I'm still worried about those I left behind. The situation is extremely catastrophic. There are no hospitals. About 55 hospitals are out of service. If something happens to anyone, you won't be able to move them to hospital. This is very bad. I don't know how they're living.
Many other Sudanese citizens who have fled their country have similar stories.
The hardest moment is thinking about leaving the country. You keep thinking amid sounds of heavy explosion and gunfire. I decided to leave with my children from the conflict zone. The capital is almost divided. We could not move with our personal car. We had to pay a taxi to flee. We as civilians felt as if we're unimportant, and we felt imminent threat. Countries are evacuating their citizens from Sudan, and this scared us.
We are grateful to be in Egypt. There are lots of people fleeing here, but we need help to address some things. People are coming with very high tension and panic from a state of war, so we need to deal with the situation quickly and help people come in quicker.
Apart from Egypt, the UN says that over 20,000 people, mostly women and children, have fled Sudan to seek safety in Chad across the border from Darfur. Eastern Chad already hosts over 400,000 refugees from Sudan, and the new arrivals are placing additional strain on the country's overstretched public services and resources.
There is no security. We fled from Sudan to Chad. We want to be safe. There is no security in Sudan. We came with nothing. We need so many things to survive. We are very tired. We came during Ramadan with no food or water.
We have no water, no food, no mattresses to sleep. Some of us are sick and need medical attention. We are tired and hungry. We cannot go back because it's not safe. They took everything we have, shot at us, and burned houses.
The journeys by fleeing Sudanese citizens are fraught with risk. Those fleeing often have to cross RSF checkpoints, where they are typically waved through, but where some civilians have reportedly been shot.
While thousands of people have fled violence in Sudan, crossing borders into neighboring countries, millions of Sudanese remain stuck in the capital city Khartoum and elsewhere where fighting is taking place. They've been left without access to basic services such as electricity and trapped in their homes. The violence in the country has killed hundreds of people since the 15th of April.
Sudan, on the brink of a full-scale civil war, is seeing its capital city Khartoum quickly become a ghost town, causing citizens to fear worsening conditions as buses arrive to pick up individuals fleeing for safety.
Sudanese people are in shock. We weren't expecting to be in this situation. We are afraid, especially after the evacuation of expatriates.
Standing with their luggage, Sudanese citizens were seen taking any available ride out of the capital, even after a spike in the bus fees.
There's a big increase in the price of gas, which is reflected on the price of the bus tickets. Before the war, the bus to Egypt was for 30,000 or 35,000 Sudanese pounds, with an extra cost of the taxi on the border crossing. Now it's more than 200,000 Sudanese pounds, and every day there's an increase.
For those still in the city, residents have been trapped in their homes, venturing out only to seek provisions at shops which have been hit by looting and where supplies have been dwindling.
A lot of people, a lot of people that I hear from, they're leaving Khartoum, they're going to a nearby state. It's much safer there. Some people have families there, some people don't. They go and rent apartments over there. But it's a good idea. And me and my family, we're considering right now, leaving Khartoum. But the risk about leaving our house, leaving everything, our belongings, is just way too hard to process. Even the streets, even the journey, if it takes, I have small sisters, young sisters. So it's really a risk, leaving the house right now. So we're trying to find a good opportunity for us to try and leave.
People across the capital have been suffering frequent soaring prices, power outages and water shortages, while the supply of basic necessities like food and medicines have also been badly disrupted by the continuing conflict.
The violence has taken a terrible toll on health. On top of the number of deaths and injuries caused by the conflict itself, WHO expects there will be many more deaths due to outbreaks, lack of access to food and water, and disruptions to essential health services, including immunization. WHO estimates that 1/4 of the lives lost so far could have been saved with access to basic hemorrhage control. But paramedics, nurses, and doctors are unable to access injured civilians, and civilians are unable to access services. In the capital, Khartoum, 61% of health facilities are closed, and only 16% are operating as normal.
But right now, the vast majority of people have been infected with infectious diseases in Sudan are doing so because they're having to drink dirty water. They're doing so because they're crowded into basements and unable to access care. They're doing so because vaccination is not happening in young children. So when we look at biologic risks, as you put them, the main biologic risks to humans in Sudan is the fact that there's an ongoing conflict, there's ongoing war, and the denial of public health and health services to that population is what represents the major risk to health and the major risk of infectious diseases.
Hundreds have already died from fighting in Sudan. The conflict has also triggered a humanitarian crisis.
Since the start of fighting on 15 April, hundreds of people have been killed and thousands injured. The violence must stop. It risks a catastrophic conflagration within Sudan that could engulf the whole region and beyond. I strongly condemn the indiscriminate bombardment of civilian areas, including healthcare facilities. and I call on the parties to stop combat operations in densely populated areas and to allow unhindered humanitarian aid operations. Civilians must be able to access food, water and other essential supplies and evacuate from combat zones.
Most hospitals in Khartoum have been shut down amid the violence, with a few left open, only offering limited services. UNICEF says the fighting has taken a devastating toll on the country's children.
We now have reports of at least 9 children killed, at least 50 have been injured. Those numbers will continue to rise as long as fighting continues. Really important to remember this fighting, as many of you will have seen, also means that you've just got large numbers of people trapped. So they haven't got access to electricity and they're terrified of running out of food, of water, of medicines. We've now got a situation where critical life-saving support for around 50,000 children is at risk. Now, severely acutely malnourished children. Now, if you can picture what that looks like, these children are in hospitals because they have the most severe cases. So they're being fed with tubes because that's literally the only way they can be fed. And when the bombing begins or the shelling begins outside a hospital, and when medical staff need to flee, then what? Humanitarian assistance is critical. Now, UNICEF and our partners, we can't provide that support when the safety and security of staff is not guaranteed. As the UN Secretary General has been saying for a week, we need forces to immediately cease hostilities, for all parties to respect their international obligations to keep children safe from harm.
The recent violence was triggered by a disagreement over an internationally backed plan to form a new civilian government 4 years after the fall of autocrat Omar al-Bashir and 2 years after a military coup. Both sides accuse the other of thwarting the transition.
And finally, on the programme, even as the conflict in Sudan rages on, a Sudanese artist is using art to bring hope to the war-torn country. 42-year-old Khalid uses his drawings to show solidarity as he advocates for a peaceful resolution.
In his living room in Norway, while the TV broadcasts pictures of the violence back home in Khartoum, Khalid Al-Baid does what he has become known for in the Middle East and beyond, drawing cartoons. His latest, entitled The Dogfight, depicts the two main Sudanese foes, Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and paramilitary leader General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, as dogs fighting over a piece of meat in the shape of Sudan, while around them stand figures depicting the alleged regional backers on each side. Drawing cartoons, which he publishes on social media, is a way for him to cut through the propaganda of either camp and show there is a peaceful alternative.
Art is needed in times like this because it's important to show people. Art is about, hope. Art is about showing there's a different way to talk about things.
42-year-old Al-Ba, known in the Middle East for cartoons on the Arab Spring, government misrule, and wars in Syria and Yemen, he uses this latest drawing to show solidarity to the people of Sudan.
It's all about spreading the understanding and having something that makes sure that this is everyone's place to show solidarity. So art is continuous resistance. Art is our way to continue fighting. No matter what's happening, artists will continue to write history day by day.
With the internet still up in Khartoum, Al-Ba is in constant communication with friends and family, or reposting practical advice to his social media followers, like how to behave at checkpoints, in the hope of helping those trying to leave.
Video of our house in Sudan.
And that's the programme today, but remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Tenyola Uyetayo. Bye for now.